Thank you for coming. My name is Paul Komisarov. I work with the Australian-based non-government organisation Global Reconciliation, which seeks to promote dialogue and communication across cultural, racial and other kinds of differences. We've convened this discussion here today to talk about concerns that have been raised in recent times about changes in the Australian community, and especially attacks that have raised concerns amongst many people on the Muslim community and on questions about the status of multiculturalism in Australia. In this discussion today we've invited a number of participants who represent a variety of groups who will introduce themselves as they talk. I would like to start the discussion by perhaps asking one or two people to set the scene by introducing what their understanding of what the problem is that we're seeking to address here. Gaith, I wonder if you would start.
Sure, thanks, Paul. My name's Gaith Crane. I'm currently the President of the Zone Council of Victoria. Obviously, we have a very strong interest in this particular discussion, given it's our community that's at the very centre of what's occurring at the moment. The issue from our perspective is there are clearly events occurring overseas which impact a very small number of individuals in Australia. But it's been the way in which Australia, from a leadership perspective, has responded to those events that has caused us a lot of concern. We are concerned around the language which leaders within Australia have been using, and the wedge politics, if you like, that's been employed, that's put our community front and centre in a way which I don't think really is justified by the magnitude of the problem we're facing. And that's essentially the problem as we see it, and we've seen some very real impact on our community with not only an increase in anti-Islamic sentiment, but actual physical attacks on Muslims in this country, which is unprecedented. It never occurred to this extent post 9/11, yet it's occurring today. And it's a real fundamental question: what's occurred in that last decade that's led Australia to such a multicultural society to respond in the way it's responded in the last month or so?
My name's Reem. I'm a Syrian Muslim Australian, and I'd say I'd agree with Khaif's definition of the problem. I think there's a lack of sophistication in the way we discuss some of the issues that we're facing. An example of that would be the discussion of the burqa in Parliament. That it's actually not called a burqa, as Walid Ali wrote, but making those mistakes and kind of presenting Islam as a unified one ideal, one way of life that everybody is having, putting everybody in this bucket and then labeling it terrorist, un-Australian is putting a lot of Muslims and Muslims who've been here for generations in harm's way, and it's actually causing them to feel isolated and in some cases, like they said, attacked.
My name is Dure Dara. I come from an Indian descent, Sri Lankan mother, Pakistani father, Muslim and Christian, and I follow the teachings of Buddhist living. And I want to say, as a woman who represents the Victorian Women's Trust and the Global Reconciliation, this kind of permission against women, or the entitlement that it gives, because there's no voice speaking out from either trenches in government and leadership, puts all women at risk, because it's just up for it. And it means that women are worrying about their own safety. Already we have to look after ourselves from domestic violence. We don't need to have a kind of community campaign to further erode our confidence, our citizenship, our rights.
Can I just, my name is Yusuf Al-Binawi. I'm a Palestinian, an Arab, and a Muslim, what else could go wrong in one person? Person of disability as well. I think I'm here because I feel that my community is threatened with no justice to this threat. Like Raif has mentioned, one thing is missing is knowledge. And also I agree with Reem that the conduct of this issue lacks sophistication and lacks depth. And unfortunately, some groups within the ruling parties maybe, or media, are using the ignorance within the public Australians about Islam towards their favourable end, increasing fear. Of course, the prerequisite to fear is ignorance. If we address the issue of ignorance and promoting knowledge, maybe we'll be able to counter these kind of attempts, because we don't have faith that we are going to change the mind of the decision makers necessarily, because they might have access to knowledge, but yet I'm sure they have agendas that we don't know about. I think our hope is the public, the values of Australia that makes Australia a beautiful country, the harmony within communities, and the fact that we should invest in the good hearts and minds of Australians who unfortunately are left with no enough resources, to say the least, to teach them about what it actually means to be Muslim, to answer the questions of why as opposed to what. Need to encourage them to do that, and we'll see how that goes.
Paul, can I just pick up a comment on Yusuf's point there about knowledge? We have the same problem with the extremes on both ends of the spectrum. They look at Islam and our religion in exactly the same way. Our own extremes and the far right extremes do exactly the same thing. They pluck a particular verse or a particular sentence with no context, without actually understanding the religion at all. Both ends of the spectrum do exactly the same thing. And they reach conclusions which are incorrect about what the religion stands for. And it leaves those of us in the middle, in effect, dodging bullets from both sides. So when we're talking about knowledge, this applies to both ends of the spectrum, those within our community and those outside of the religious community. You need to get the right knowledge from the right sources. The fundamental problem from the extremist perspective is the way in which they source their knowledge, and I'll put that in inverted commas, and the same with the far right, they do exactly the same thing. We need the community to understand there is a way in which knowledge is obtained to give you the truth about what religion really stands for.
There's been a lot of discussion in the media recently about the radicalisation, or the alleged radicalisation of the younger population, especially in the Muslim community. Is that a real phenomenon? Are there actual changes occurring that we need to be concerned about?
My name is Hassanan Idris. I had no idea what I was coming here, to be honest, but I'm a local, I've lived here my whole life. To answer the question, I've never actually met a radical in my life, to be honest. I've never met a sheikh that's a radical, I've never met anyone that's... So when I watch the news and I see all the fear, it bugs me out that I've been to the mosque thousands of times in my life and I've never met anyone even slightly even along those lines. And some of those people that have actually been arrested also came from my community, and even them, I never really saw anything from them either, to be honest. Well, not according to my knowledge, or anyone I know. So that's the question. I've never actually met any radical or anyone that's like I met you. I've never my local mosque is the ICB council in the city. And I've never actually, and I can't pretend that I would tolerate it either, to be honest. If there was.
My name is Saeed Sharifuddin. I'm local, I live here, I'm Muslim. I work with Muslim youth in Australia for the last 20 years. I used to work with Islamic Council of Victoria and Federation of Australia Muslim and Muslim Youth, FAMC. Now, the radicalization of Muslims, is any change in Muslim youth is happening, is not visible in our community. We don't see what media are saying or what government is saying. There are Muslims, there are a huge amount of Muslim youth going to go there. Very small number of people who are not even counted in the Muslim community are going on radical thing, we are shocked where they were living. If somebody burned ISIS flag or in the house or outside, it does not represent Muslim or Muslim community. And which we are concerned about where these people are from. We don't see them in the mosque. We don't see them in the community activities. We don't see them representing Muslim community. And how they monopolize representation in the media on behalf of all Muslims. And what's happening now, there are two issues: ignorance of Australian community about Islam and Muslims, and anybody who sort of self-qualify that they can talk about Islam. For example, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, the Age paper, Jacqueline wrote an article wearing hijab is sunnat and wajib is Arabic words. And these words not known to Australian community. They think what is wajib, what is sunnat. And she's really saying something very contrary to Islamic basic principle. And she writes in the Age paper saying, this is what I believe, I used to be a Muslim. So instead of knowing Islam from the primary sources, going through secondary sources and taking the Islam from the media as authoritative source is wrong.
I'm just going to add that I learned of this new term called Sheikh YouTube, Imam Guru, which is where a lot of these young radicals are apparently getting a lot of the dogma that they're learning from. So nowadays, if you go online, you can find websites and Google videos, YouTube videos of sheikhs with a lot of that radicalization material, preaching it and trying to recruit these young kids. So they're not learning it from within the Muslim community, I think, and they're finding this stuff online.
My name is Mujtaba Satria. I'm talking as a person, guest of global reconciliation. From the perspective of multiculturalism, as we are living in a world in high speed of transformation, everywhere is high speed transformation. There are deep transformations in culture and society everywhere. Is deep transformation in Australian society, and there are deep transformation in the societies where people are immigrating, have immigrated to here. This transformation brings a certain number of difficult issues, and we cannot simplify them. These are difficult issues. We have a system of education which is a tool for homogenization as a member of the society to which we immigrate. We go to primary school, high school, then we become Australian. The resources that are there, financial, cultural, is good enough. Could be more, but it's good enough. But there is another element for multiculturalism which is needed and is not good enough, is resources to strengthen the cultural reference to self, to where you come with the wealth of cultural background that you are bringing to this society. And the resources that are given for that is meaningless. So if we want to have a multicultural society which is functional, which is working, we need to strengthen this dual identity, being Australian and being who we have been and the cultural baggage which we are coming here. And this cultural baggage needs to be fed, is the condition to be part of Australian society.
Hi, my name is Ellen Samuel. I'm a local and also the Greens candidate for the state election in November, so thank you for the invitation. I wanted to make a comment about the radicalisation of youth. We've heard some people here say that it's not something that people are learning from their community and it's not visible. I think there will always be some young people who feel marginalised and vulnerable and don't know their place in society, who may become radicalised, and that's not something that's unique to the Muslim community. But I think what the problem is at the moment is that we're not actually addressing the underlying causes, and by further marginalising the Muslim community, isn't that just a recipe for creating radicalisation rather than getting rid of it? So I think that our response to what we think of as radicalisation or the problem actually feeds the problem, which is very scary. And if you look at the government's response, they've spent $650 million on so-called counter-terrorism measures and only $13 million on social cohesion measures, which is just, for me, something that shows that actually they're not trying to really address what they say is the problem. It's about using the Muslim community as a scapegoat for a deeper problem in society which the government refuses to address, which I feel has to do with the lack of vision and leadership and planning for our community. If you look at somewhere like Western Sydney, it's a place where people have probably the most strongly held anti-immigration views, but it's not necessarily because of immigrants, it's because they have a lack of infrastructure and a lack of education, and there's been no planning in that area. And so I think that's actually the problem we need to address, and it's a disgrace that we're using the Muslim community as a scapegoat for the problem.
My name is Lionel Bopage. I'm originally from Sri Lanka. Well, I agree with what has been already said, but I want to expand this discussion in a sense because I have experiences from Sri Lanka itself, about what is happening to the Muslim community there. Well, the Australian experience is additional. Now, learning about Islam, while useful, it will not necessarily counter what is going on currently. Say, if we look through the Australian experiences, I know when One Nation came up with Pauline Hanson, that was against migrants. They were creating some sort of propaganda against migrants to develop their own agenda, right-wing agenda of exclusion, of unique culturalism, Anglo-Saxon culturalism. And well, it is a global phenomenon. Say there are right-wing forces. Say, for example, in the United States, if you look at Tea Party, in Sri Lanka, if you look at the governing party, they are driving these extreme right-wing agendas in order to protect their own privileges and interests. And they want to divide communities along religious, linguistic, and whatever other divisions that they could impose on. So that is what is happening in Sri Lanka. So in order to understand what is happening in Australia, we need to understand this broader context.
Okay. I'm Chris Darling at Monash University, and my main interest is international students and their well-being. It's what I do in terms of Islam. I was radicalised. 45 years ago, I was just an ordinary lad, caught up in the anti-war movement, became a communist, got arrested, blah blah blah. It's what you did in my day. But yeah.
Did you serve time?
Pardon?
Did you serve?
Not long. I saw the insides of self. Look, it seems to me that the figures you just gave away. Some years ago, when we invaded Iraq, there were 200,000 people outside the library. The march took an hour just to move off. This war's been going on now for 10 years. There's a lot of opposition to the war. There's a lot of 10 years of bombing in the Middle East. It's very hard to sustain enthusiasm. And I think what's happening, you say, why recently is it getting so bad, is there's a need to convince the Australian people that we are at risk. ISIS seems an awful long way away to most Australians. And after 10 years of doing this, to go back again, we need to convince. So this message is being directed. So there's a reason why 650 million goes to one area, 13 million to another, because the real need is to convince the Australians that Islam is a threat to us in order to justify continuing endless war.
My name is Suresh Sundram and I'm associated with Global Reconciliation. I think that in the discussion today we conflated two very important issues. The first issue is about the plurality of Islam and the fact that underneath Islam sits many different interpretations of the faith. And secondly, about the politicisation of of Islam by particular elements. I think we need to recognise in the same way that other faiths have been politicised and appropriated by various political and other groups. We need to recognise that the same has happened to Islam, and as a consequence of that, there have been implications which have been widespread, both in the Middle East, but also in countries like Sri Lanka and India and other such places. What we need to do, on the one hand, is to educate the community about the plurality of Islam, the fact that there are many different interpretations of the faith. But secondly, we need to also educate the community that there are elements which are politicised and as political in their nature as there are in any other field of endeavour and with respect to any other set of beliefs or religion.